Welcome again to Profiles. This is a production of Nantucket Community Television, Channel 18. I'm Charley Walters. Dylan Fernandes is back with me in the studio today. I believe he's the first person I've interviewed twice on this program.
Wow. Recurring guest.
He represents the Barnstable, Dukes, and Nantucket District in Massachusetts House of Representatives. He was first elected in 2016, and he was recently re-elected in 2018. And he ran unopposed, I should add.
I did, yeah, and it's an honor to represent my hometown district I grew up in and love. And it's all, for folks who don't know, it's half of Falmouth and all of Martha's Vineyard, all of Nantucket, and the Elizabeth Island chain, which is the smallest municipality in the entire state in terms of population.
Is that Gosnold?
That's Gosnold.
And
yeah.
What is the population there?
So the population, I mean, it kind of varies because I think a lot of people who have a house on Gosnold like to put it as their primary residence, even though they really don't live there.
We get a bit of that here.
yeah. But, you know, it's around kind of 50 to 100 people kind of mark it as their primary residence. When I first ran for election, I won it in the primary with 4 votes, and my opposition I think got 3 votes. So that kind of shows you there.
Every vote counts.
That's right.
You're a Democrat.
I am, yeah.
But most of the reps from Massachusetts on Beacon Hill are Republicans.
They're Democrats.
From this district, from
this
the Cape
district,
and Islands.
Yes.
There are 2 Dems and 4 Republicans. Mm-hmm. How does that work for you?
Well, it's great. I mean, we, so there's 6 of us who represent the Cape and Islands in the House. 4 are Republicans. Sarah Peake and I, who represent really the extremities of the Cape and Islands. Sarah represents Provincetown and kind of the very outer Cape. We work really closely with our Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives. And there's actually some political scientists who look at the Cape delegation and have kind of coined us the Cape Cod Party rather than the Cape and Islands Party, I should say, rather than the Democrat or Republican Party, because when it comes to local issues, 90% of them are nonpartisan. And when you look at the State House, when you look at Beacon Hill, Boston has over 40 representatives. And so they have a large constituency there. There are only 6 of us down here representing the entire islands and the Cape. We really need to band together and be cohesive on local issues, and that's what we do. And so I oftentimes support my Republican colleagues' amendments. I speak to them during the budget session, supporting my Republican colleagues, and they do the same for me. And it's because, we care deeply at the end of the day about the residents on the islands, the residents on the Cape, and we're going to work together because there are a lot of, there's 160 reps up there, and we only got 6 of them, so we need to stick together. And I will say the Cape reps, I'm the only rep in the entire House that represents the islands, but a lot of the Cape reps will, Republican or Democrat, will stick up for Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard just because that's how close-knit a group we are at the State House.
Well, it's nice to know there's some bipartisanship going on somewhere, especially in a state that's so overwhelmingly Democratic.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. And the governor, the Democrats have a supermajority in the House and in the Senate, which means that if the governor vetoes something that we pass, we can override his veto and have it pass into law without his support. But I think it's worth noting that, the legislature, for the most part, works fairly well and fairly closely with the administration. There are some kind of large disagreements that we'll always have, and sometimes there's approach for one side that's a little more incremental than other people want to, and other people want to put forward a more kind of faster pace policy agenda. But at the end of the day, people work together, and they do so in a bipartisan manner, and they work to get the job done. And that's why when people ask about kind of the difference between Washington and Massachusetts, well, we pass a ton of bills. We do a lot of work. We do a lot of really significant policy pieces, and that's because we can find common ground.
Well, it's interesting in Massachusetts because historically, there have often been cases where you've got a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and you had a Republican governor, and this is one of the times when you have that situation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to really get in anybody's way because, as you say, you guys are used to working together.
Yeah, and our Republican governors are not kind of, part of this Trump party, and they wouldn't get elected in Massachusetts if they were, and
Baker's been pretty open about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a Republican governor that's openly opposing a lot of the Trump administration's policies, right? And so they're not kind of, when you think of the Republican Party nationally, they're not really a part of that. But at the end of the day, there's still some large disagreements that I have with the governor and that the Democratic legislature has with the governor. But at the end of the day, we work together in a cordial, respectful manner, and I think that's the best thing to do for our democracy.
Well, I would agree with that for sure. Now, you had worked on Beacon Hill prior to your election.
Close to it. Close to it. Yeah.
You're about to finish your first term and start your second term. Any surprises in your first term?
I was surprised at how much we were able to get done in the first term. I was surprised about how much
you were able to get.
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise. When you think about kind of coming in as a freshman, and you think about the state house. So the Senate, there's only 40 members, and they're largely treated as kind of co-equal. But the House, there's 160 members, and so just kind of like the United States House, it's more of a top-down system of
It's a very similar ratio.
Yes, and so coming in as a freshman, you really need to work to have your voice heard. And we were able to do a lot of really good things for Nantucket, for the district, and for the state this session. I was the first new representative to pass a bill through the House of Representatives, the only freshman rep to pass a standalone piece of legislation through the House, and that was a bill signing Massachusetts onto the Paris Climate Agreement. Was the first rep to pass an amendment, and that was a piece, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard specific, on the marijuana bill. And we were able to secure over $500,000 in the budget for the region. And so, we've been able to, come in, hit the ground running, and really get the job done in a tangible way for residents of the district. And that's something I'm really proud of, and also something that doesn't always happen in your first 2 years.
Well, let's stick with bills for a while. What other bills are pertaining either completely to Nantucket or largely to Nantucket? You were talking about an English language bill.
Yeah. So there's several bills. So Nantucket filed, I believe, 10 home rule petitions.
And that's a lot. I mean, compared to other communities,
that might be the most in the state. I mean, that might. I actually just texted a friend of mine who represents Boston to see how many home rules they sent up, and I bet it's probably on the same level as Nantucket. So you guys, Nantucket is a unique place in the state geographically. Only place is 30 miles out to sea. So there's some really unique needs here.
Yes.
And when you think about kind of the marijuana piece, you have to travel through federal air or federal water to transport marijuana, which is now a legal industry in Massachusetts, and it's still illegal on the federal level. So how do you do it here? And so Julian Sear and I, we got
our state senator.
Our state senator, who just got reelected as well.
Yes.
A terrific advocate for the island. We got an amendment in the marijuana bill to have the Cannabis Control Commission, this new state entity focused on regulating cannabis, issue special regulations for Martha's Vineyard, for Nantucket, because at the end of the day, the island should have the same access all of the state's resources and all of the state's programs that the rest of the state has. And so that is something that's rare. It's rare to get a carve out for specific communities and a statewide piece of legislation, but that's an example of fighting for our district in particular. Mobile gear fishing, that's another piece that we filed this year to ban mobile gear fishing in state waters. And although the bill didn't pass, Senator Sear was really a leader in this, and we worked very closely with his office in securing funds for the Department of Marine Fisheries to do a study of mobile gear fishing around the island and how it impacts the ocean ecosystem here, and particularly the squid mops and the like
tell us
here.
what mobile gear fishing is.
So mobile gear fishing is basically any kind of any fishing vessel that uses kind of large, mobile gear rigs to do its trawling. And so that's something that it's particularly impacted the waters around Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and part of the Cape as well. We also have these very large kind of midwater trawlers that come in, generally not from our district. In fact, I don't know if a single one is in our district, that come in and cast these massive nets and scoop up a whole lot of our ocean ecosystem, our ocean species. And so we worked really hard in conjunction with the Cape delegation and the Fishermen's Alliance on the Cape to advocate for a buffer zone for these large midwater trawlers, specifically because they were decimating our herring population that we have here. And so we luckily had a really big win on that, and they are issuing new guidelines and new restrictions that these large midwater trawlers have to be, there's going to be a 12-mile buffer zone for Massachusetts, and then actually for the Cape and Islands it extends all the way out to 20 miles. So a huge win for preserving our local ecosystem here and preserving the fishing industry for the locals, because the locals are in much smaller operations than those kind of midwater trawlers.
Does this legislation involve the seabed? In other words, if you're trawling and you're dragging across the actual seabed, does that
for the trawler?
Legislation?
Yeah. So that wasn't the ruling for the 12 to 20 miles out. That is a regulation put forward by Department of Marine Fisheries. It wasn't something that needed to get passed through the State House, and that would include those kind of large midwater trawlers that do drag on the floor.
You can't just go in and chew up the ocean floor anymore. No, is what you're saying.
Not for these large midwater trawlers. Yeah,
yes.
That's right. And we've been working really hard on a lot of ocean preservation and ocean stewardship issues, and we're actually working on a couple pieces right now to file next session around plastics and around offshore drilling, which is something that the Trump administration recently opened up. So more to come on that, but basically one piece we're putting forward is a ban from any sort of deep water or any offshore drilling for oil of any sort in Massachusetts. And so any company that will not be able to do business here if they're looking to drill offshore. And I've actually joined with a caucus of coastal legislators from across the entire eastern seaboard, and we're actually all going to file legislation at roughly the same time in our respective states to have an entire East Coast-wide ban on offshore drilling. And so that's an important piece that's coming up. And then we've done a lot on a number of other issues around shellfish propagation and ocean acidification and the like.
Yeah, shellfish propagation is a real issue on Nantucket. This is going to be not a great scalloping season, and there are problems with eelgrass and fertilizer getting into the harbor and so on.
That's right. Yeah, so this is an issue that Julian Sear and I have worked really hard on. I worked with the local group to get the season extended just this past year. And in the budget, we've secured $350,000 over the past 2 years for shellfish propagation. And that's to be divided by county. And so I don't know what the math is there, but Nantucket gets a little over $100,000 in total so far. Even more than that, but in total so far for shellfish propagation. And that goes a long way to sustaining the industry here. And even more importantly, we passed this bill on ocean acidification. This is something we talked about, you're reminding me, in our first interview.
We did, a year and a half ago, yes.
Way long ago, when I was talking about just filing this bill. And so this is another example of really kind of working hard over the past 2 years to move this over the finish line, because this was a priority of mine. And so Senator Sear filed it in the Senate, I filed it in the House. My predecessor, Tim Madden, actually filed it before me. And we were able to pass it this year. And so this sets up a commission, a state commission that Julian Sear and I are going to be a part of now that we passed it, that studies ocean acidification, studies it in our local coastal waters. It convenes a group of scientists, a group of shellfishermen and shellfisher women, and industry groups to look at ocean acidification, its impact on our shellfishing industry, its impact on the lobster industry, if there is one, and also come up with solutions on how to mitigate it and how to address it. And this is a huge issue because for folks who don't know about ocean acidification, our ocean absorbs about 25 to 30% of the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere. And when it does that, when it dissolves that carbon dioxide, that process sucks up the carbonate in the water that shellfish need to form their shells. And so if shellfish don't have carbonate in the water to form their shells, they can't grow. And so we've seen this over on the West Coast. An entire shellfishing industry over there was almost decimated because of ocean acidification. And this is something that we want to be proactive about in Massachusetts, because we have a $500 million shellfishing industry. And so
this is a state-funded bill you're talking about.
This is, yeah, so this was a bill I filed. This is a bill Julian filed in the Senate, and we passed it as part of this larger environmental bond bill about 4 months ago. And so this is the first ocean acidification bill in Massachusetts. And when you think about ocean acidification, it's one of the lesser known byproducts of man-made release of greenhouse gases, but it is almost, if not just as impactful. And if we don't get ahead of it within my children's lifetime, it could lead to a massive extinction of ocean life, and we're already seeing a lot of its negative effects. So this is something we want to get on top of right away.
Let's stick with the waters of the district for a minute.
Sure.
The Cape Wind project that was going to be in Nantucket Sound, but much closer to Cape Cod than Nantucket, I guess that's now a dead issue.
Yes.
But there is a proposed wind farm that's going to be, or maybe south of Martha's Vineyard and southwest of Nantucket. Tell us what you know about that.
Sure. So this is an incredibly important project for Massachusetts. And for folks who don't know, back in 2014, the state authorized 1,600 megawatts of energy to come from deep water offshore wind. These wind projects have to be at least 10 miles offshore. And so the one that is going to open up south of the Vineyard is about 12 miles
Is this
offshore.
definitely going to happen?
This is definitely going to happen.
Really? Okay.
This is absolutely going to happen. It's already underway. And in fact, they've already chosen some of the companies to do it. So, so this is, when you think of our renewable energy future and as a millennial, there's no issue that'll impact my generation or my children's generation more than that of climate change and sea level rise. And when you think about our district, frankly, a large portion of the Cape and Islands, as we know it today, will not exist in the next 50 to 100 years. And so we really need to get on top of reducing our carbon footprint and sequestering greenhouse gas emissions. And so this project is underway, and we doubled the authorization this past session. And so it went from 1,600 megawatts to now an allowance of 3,200 megawatts. And so just to put that into kind of terms that people can understand, 3,200 megawatts will power roughly 2 million homes, probably a little over 2 million homes in Massachusetts. And there are roughly 2 million homes in Massachusetts, right? So
this one project could power the whole Commonwealth.
It could power all the homes in the Commonwealth.
All the homes, okay, but not industry.
Yeah, but I think that puts in perspective just how, once this project is fully built out, how impactful it could be for Massachusetts. And it's worth noting that this is happening in our district, and this is a project that me and my staff and Senator Sear and his staff have been very heavily involved in. And this is a project that is first in the nation. It is going to be the largest project in the nation of this scale. And now that we've done this as a state, and now that we've doubled our reauthorization just a few months ago, other states across the entire East Coast are jumping in and passing their own deep water offshore wind bills. And so this is so monumental because when you think of global warming, when you think of climate change, this is an issue that knows no boundaries, it knows no borders. Massachusetts could get to 100% renewable tomorrow, and we're still going to see 6-foot sea level rise by the end of the century. But if Massachusetts, like it has done on so many other issues, puts itself forward as a national leader, other states look at what we're doing and they follow suit. They've done that with healthcare, they've done that with gay marriage, they've done that with a whole host of other issues. Our leadership on climate change will really shift the nation in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Who has control over this? The state, the feds, both?
Yeah, so
Neither?
it's a little bit of both. Massachusetts has the most control over this because we decide where we're going to get our energy from. And so we said we're going to get this percentage, this amount of our energy from deep water offshore wind, and then we passed a bill to do it. But so but BOEM is a federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management.
Okay.
And so they control the tracks where the wind farm is going. And so there's a lot of state and federal government cooperation on this project. And BOEM has had to make some significant changes because this, as I mentioned before, is a first in the nation project, and they're used to dealing with offshore deep water drilling. You know, they've never had to do these kind of permitting projects before on this scale, and so it's a bit of a learning process for them. But there's been a really healthy dialogue, I think, between our state and the federal government to really move this project forward.
Now, it's far out there, but is any of this visible from any part of Nantucket?
No, no, I don't think so. And if it was, it would have to be an incredibly clear day, and it might look like a toothpick. Where you can see it, and again, it's still, I think no is the answer for Nantucket. But the only place that I know of where you can see it is if you go to Aquina on the vineyard, and you go up to the bluff.
That's on the west end of the vineyard, if I've got that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And you go up to the bluff, and you look out.
That's a high bluff.
It's a very high bluff. It's beautiful. And you look out, and it's a totally clear day, and it's not the summer, so there's not that haze. Maybe you get this time of year. You can see some sticks, some like tiny little sticks on the horizon. And that's why, there hasn't been the opposition to this project that Cape Wind went through. And Cape Wind was going about 5 miles roughly offshore, and
with ferries going by it.
And one of the most trafficked waterways in the country. And so that it's not running into those types of concerns. There's certainly concerns, especially with some members of the fishing industry, but those have largely been quelled, and for the most part, there's broad consensus that this project is going to be a great success for Massachusetts, and it's a first of its nation project, so we gotta stay on it.
What kind of a time frame are we talking about?
Well, so it's underway right now. So this group called Vineyard Wind was given the first kind of authorization of 800 megawatts, and so they are underway right now doing all the surveys and the like needed to get the project moving. There's a terminal in New Bedford that the state funded to the tune of, I think, around like $100 million several years ago.
And that's where the power would go.
That's where the wind turbines are going to be kind of, I guess, put together and launched from.
Oh, I see.
And so
Okay.
this actually was started back when we thought there was going to be Cape Wind. They built this large terminal, then these opposition groups kind of stopped Cape Wind, and then this terminal was kind of just sitting there. But now that we have this even larger, more efficient project, now we have a place ready to go in New Bedford to do a lot of the work for it. And then also, Vineyard Wind has a community benefit agreement with Vineyard Power. And so Senator Sear and I worked really close with them in terms of helping them navigate the various state agencies needed to get approval for this project. But they have a station that's going to be in Vineyard Haven. And so even though, my district's not going to be the district where we're putting together massive turbines because we don't have the infrastructure for that, but on Martha's Vineyard, we're going to have a place to service these turbines.
Where will the connections be from the source of the power to the mainland or the island or the islands?
So right now, the connection, and this was actually very recently decided. I think they're still working out some of that, but one piece that was very recently decided was that the Cape connection is going to be through Lewis Bay in
right about where the ferry goes in.
Yeah, exactly. And Barnstable. Yarmouth, there was some dispute originally with Yarmouth because Yarmouth really didn't want it. Then they just went to Barnstable, and Barnstable said that they would take it. I think they gave them like $20 million to take it, so a pretty good deal, I'd say, for the town of Barnstable. I don't quote me on that number, but there was a number similar to that. But
so Nantucket will be in a position of having the power go from the source to the Cape and then back to Nantucket. In other words, it wouldn't go directly to Nantucket, or
there's been some discussion there. And we'll have to see. The project still isn't fully built out, and they just kind of finished the agreement for a mainland connection a couple weeks ago. So we'll have to see what makes sense.
But our existing cables could be utilized. The two we have right now going from the cliffside area to wherever it is on the Cape, those could be utilized as it stands now.
Yeah.
If I have that correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that they would be. Those cables, I think it's worth noting that those cables are, they're aging. And so one of the things that we've worked on is having kind of making Nantucket just more sustainable as it is. And so one of the things we worked on was getting Tesla battery packs here. so that you can have energy storage
Yeah.
right here on island and don't need as much capacity coming through the cables. And another project as well that receives state grants around air conditioning units, kind of green air conditioning units. And so we've been trying to work on projects to make both islands more self-sufficient and sustainable. One project on the vineyard, actually, that the folks on Nantucket might want to look at recreating if it makes sense, but the vineyard is going to have the first RTA, Regional Transit Authority, in the entire state to be all electric buses, which is really incredible. And I think an island community makes the most sense for being the first, because the routes are a little shorter than some of the longer ones maybe in Western Mass. But that's a really exciting project that we helped them secure some significant state funds for.
Well, that's especially interesting right now because, as you know, the winter of 2018-2019 will be the first time we've had year-round bus service on Nantucket. And I would assume that the more the buses are used, the more economically viable it would be to go to a new system of powering those vehicles.
Yeah, and I think one thing to watch is how it plays out on the vineyard. Because that's going to be underway. It's currently underway. They're currently in the process of moving to all electric, and so I think Nantucket, it would be a good idea for folks to, over the next couple of years, to take a look at how the project played out on the vineyard and see if that's something that folks want to do on island. And if so, I'd be more than happy to help support them with state grants and the like needed.
In the time we have left, let me run through a few issues and get some brief comments from you. Affordable housing.
Yeah, so this is, when you think of our district, this is probably the most profoundly unaffordable district in the Commonwealth. Average home price on Nantucket is over $2.4 million. How can anyone afford that? And we're seeing an exodus of people in my generation from across the Cape and Islands, of people who grew up in this community, who love this community, but can't afford to make ends meet here. And I take the boat here all the time, and if I'm on the morning boat or the 5 o'clock boat home, it's filled with workers. So we're really reaching a point of unsustainability on both islands and frankly all of the Cape as well when it comes to affordable housing. So there's a number of pieces that we've been working on advancing. Senator Sear and I both filed a first-time homebuyers savings account to allow kind of first-time homebuyers to better save up for that really crucial down payment to put down on a home. But more importantly and more broadly, one of the things that we worked on is we really pushed for this transfer fee on home sales over $2 million for Nantucket. It would operate very similar to the transfer fee you have for your land bank, except it would be for a housing bank, and the fee is only 0.5%, so it's a lot smaller than your 2% fee on the land bank. That's something that is currently in third reading. It's in the last place in the House. We've had a group up to meet with Chairman Spiliotis, the chairman of third reading. We had a group up to meet with of Nantucketers to meet with the Speaker privately in a discussion on this bill. I am cautiously hopeful that we can move something by the end of this year. What's holding up this home rule petition, and home rule petitions are usually non-contentious unless they set precedent or have a group in opposition to them. And unfortunately, this ticks both of those boxes because it sets precedent for a housing bank for a transfer fee, and also the Realtors Association off island is very much opposed to it. And so that's something that we're really working towards. If it can't get passed, I think there's an opportunity with the room rental bill that recently passed, which is kind of colloquially called the Airbnb bill, which kind of puts a tax on Airbnbs that is comparable to the tax on hotels and motels. And so the town of Nantucket is going to receive a significant influx of revenue from that. And so where you put that revenue, or a percentage of that revenue, could be used for affordable housing. And that's a conversation that I think folks will have in the near future, and folks are having right now. But that bill, the Airbnb bill, wasn't signed into law yet. And this is kind of a longer, that piece is kind of a longer discussion, but that we're going to have a lot of local revenue coming from this Airbnb bill in the very near future. If it doesn't get done before January, it will get done within next year's session, so within the first half of next session.
Opioids.
Yes. So we passed an opioid bill this year through the House, and this is an issue that is something I care deeply about. My stepfather, I should say, but I love him. He's my father as well. He started the first sober house on Nantucket. He's worked here for many, many years on addiction issues. And my first trips over here was with him when he was working here on substance misuse and mental health issues. So keenly aware of the needs on Nantucket in particular. We passed an opioid bill through the House. Last time I came on the show, I think I talked about my bill that I filed, which was around long-term treatment options. And so there are a myriad of long-term treatment options available. Just to pick on my hometown of Falmouth, you can get equine therapy, you can do organic gardening, you can have a recovery coach, you can go to Narcotics Anonymous, you can get acupuncture. The list goes on and on just in Falmouth for long-term treatment. There's not a lot of data out there on the efficacy, the cost efficiency, and the like of all of these long-term treatment options. And so I put forward a bill to study the myriad of long-term treatment options we have and make recommendations which ones are the most effective in leading people towards recovery. And we need to be giving folks struggling with addiction the best treatment options available. And I'm really happy to say that this bill that I have moved in the opioid bill. And so that commission is now signed into law, and we're going to be looking at that in the near future. But the opioid bill, there's a lot to touch on, but one of the main components is extending medically assisted treatment in hospitals and in prisons, among several other components of it.
Good. Two more questions.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to be brief. There's just big topics.
You're doing just fine. Will there be a third bridge across the Cape Cod Canal?
I mean, you can never say never, but
it's not looking
no,
good. Okay,
it's
that's
not
probably a good thing.
So this is, and just quickly, go ahead.
Well, but the two bridges that we already have, I'm hearing that they may be rebuilt in the very near future.
There is no question that those bridges need to be replaced.
75 years old.
Yeah, 1933, right? And I just came from Boston this morning, and I always just hug in one lane and kind of, grip the steering wheel when I'm going over there because the lanes are so small.
Actually, it's 85 years, not 75 years. Let me correct myself.
Yeah, that's right.
Even worse.
And so we need to replace the bridges. The bridges are under control of the federal government and the Corps. And so the Corps is looking into, right now, looking into the feasibility of replacing the bridges. We've been working really closely with Congressman Keating, who is really leading the charge on this on the federal level, along with Senator Markey and Senator Warren. And we think that, and I think the federal government is beginning to agree that these bridges need to be replaced in the near future. they'll probably be replaced one at a time, and we'll kind of see what happens. But those conversations are underway right now. We've had several meetings with state, local, and federal officials on the bridges, and there's no question they need to be replaced. And I think for the first time in a long time, we're seeing some movement on the federal level to replace them. And it's good. So the feds own these bridges, and we want them to. There's been talk about the state taking them over. We do not want to take them over until the feds pay for new ones, and then we can have that conversation.
Well, it's good news and bad news in the same sentence. The good news is they'll be replaced. The bad news is they're going to rebuild 2 bridges.
Yeah, I know, and we'll see the mess that causes.
Yes, exactly. But on the other side of it, it'll be a good thing.
Absolutely. It needs to happen. These bridges are old. They have to get updated and kind of revamped every year. One bridge you have to paint. You have to paint it to keep it working.
And it seems to be constantly painted.
Yeah, it has to be. And so so that costs a ton of money for them as well. And so they understand now more than ever the need to replace these bridges. And there's been some really positive conversations there. And I know this has been an ongoing thing for probably before I was born, right, on replacing these bridges. But it seems like for the first time in a long time that it's something that's really gaining traction.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Dylan Fernandes, thanks for joining me again today.
Of course.
And
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you again on the show.
Yeah. Well, great. Honored to be a recurring guest. And it's an honor to serve.
Honored to have you.
It's an honor to serve this district. And if folks on Nantucket ever want to reach out, they can email me personally and reach out anytime. And the last thing I'll add, we talked a lot about the big issues facing the region, big issues facing the state, but one of the things that we work on every single day is constituent issues. People call our office every day who are seeking help with unemployment insurance, who are seeking help with getting on disability or healthcare access, or a myriad of other issues. And it's stuff that doesn't get in the papers, but it's something that we work on every day to help people with their personal lives. And usually if they're calling their state representative, it's one of the last calls they make. They're really desperate, and we really want to help these people get the help and the access that they need. And so call our office. We're here to serve you. And we'd be happy to help you with anything you need. And if it's not something we can take care of ourselves, we'll connect you with the resources available to you. So thank you.
Good to know.
Great.
Dylan, thanks.
This is a pleasure.
Pleasure for me as well. For Profiles, I'm Charley Walters. Thanks for joining me today. Please tune in again next time.